Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.
Yeah, let's start our journey around the world with Richard Kazimer in the United States. Now, Richard, we're going to hear from John Dobbie fairly shortly, where there's been a bit of civil unrest with low-income earners, particularly those working in the public sector, who haven't seen any real wage growth, in fact, seen their salaries going backwards. Seems to be a common theme around the world, people on low wages just getting worse off. And same thing, it seems, happening in the United States.
You know, the upper 1 or 2% that controls pretty much 98% of America's wealth still have their say. And while America is experiencing the best economy, the lowest unemployment, and the highest job growth in over a decade, thanks, of course, to President Obama, the U.S. retailers are still a tad vexed that their workers might not be feeling the same spread of this monetary love that the corporations have been enjoying for quite some time. There's been a new report released this past week by the Center of American Progress that is indicating that 66% of the top 100 U.S. retailers are all in agreement that stagnant workers' wages are indeed a threat to their corporate profit, meaning that low wages or evaporating the middle class to the point where even with a second or third job, the employees can't afford to buy the goods and services that they are paid to sell. Now, in perspective to the national minimum wage you have in Australia, the national federal minimum wage here in the United States is $7.25 an hour. Now, on an average, retail workers are generally paid around $10 or less. The employers, though, keep their part-time workers under 30 hours a week, which allows them to avoid paying any benefits. So they are reaping a profit by giving the workers low wages. Now, considering that the cost of living in the United States rose by $10,000 since 2000 for a family of four and no increase in wages, the average American worker is actually making less money than they did 15 years ago in a worse economy. So you would think that the retailers, knowing this and admitting that this is a problem, that they would start paying their workers a living wage. Hell no. Now, save for a handful of these companies that are going to get the jump on some of the states that are actually increasing their own state level of minimum wage, the majority of the retailers are saying they've got no intention of increasing minimum wage, and they will do anything to block a federal raise in minimum wage. They're going to focus rather on the weak consumer that they blame and also look at as their salvation to raise the bottom line. And as we all know, Phil, the best way to raise the bottom line in corporate profits is to do it on the back of your poorly paid workers.
Yeah. So let me get this right. So the retailers are saying, hey, look, people aren't buying enough because there's not enough money. You know, there's too many people who are struggling to get by. They're not buying enough from our stores. So we need to make sure, you know, someone's got to do something so that they've got more money. And we could help here by paying our workers more, but we won't do that. We'd like someone else to do it instead.
Are you running for office?
That's pretty much what they're saying by the sounds of it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
and it's just, you know, and you look at him and you go, are you really? Repeat that again. Did you hear what you said?
How long does this go on for? Because this isn't a US phenomenon. I think you've got it worse than we have, for example, here in Australia. But progressively, in the Western world, we are seeing this rich-poor gap widening. We've talked about it a lot on Balls Radio, and yet, and over recent years, it seems to become even more evident because we've been through this global recession or global financial crisis, which still isn't over. I mean, it's just now playing out in the fact that wages have stagnated for some people, anyway, at the low end. How long will this widening rich-poor gap go on for before people do actually, politicians particularly, start saying, well, this is a problem and we have to tackle it.
It will go on forever because the top 1 or 2% control about on an average 96 to 98% of the entire wealth of the United States. So as corporations, people like the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson and people like that over here who have tons of money or controlling politicians, and not just in Washington, but on the local level. That's where you get the work done.
Yeah.
As long as those politicians are in the pockets of the corporations, and corporations are viewed by the Supreme Court as having an equal vote as an individual, that corporations are people, you will not see a turnaround. That you keep the worker oppressed, keep them having as less money as they possibly can, just barely enough to live on, and you reduce their power. You reduce their power of change and of even the power to vote.
So, at the risk of getting branded as a Marxist radio show here, but isn't this at the point where everyone goes, "Come the revolution," and start putting people up against the wall and shooting them? Isn't it? Haven't we reached that point?
It's not going to happen. It will not happen because, again, our democracy is not set up to do that. Now, we have seen marches on Wall Street and things like that, the Occupy America, Occupy Wall Street. We have seen successful movements, and we are seeing some companies that are finally turning around and saying, yes, this makes more sense to help our workers out. Companies like Facebook and Apple and Microsoft and places like that.
Easy for them to do that, of course, because they're not particularly labor-intensive businesses. They're not actually paying a substantial part of their bill is not paying salaries. So a lot easier for them to do that.
Until the American public as a collective starts to hit these corporations where it hurts, which is in their pocket by not buying their product, only then will you see a turnaround. But it's hard to get people, because we're such an individualistic society, to do anything as a collective.
Now, let's move on. Sexual assault in colleges. It could be, in the United States, it looks like it could be as rampant as, I don't know, the Catholic Church, for example.
It is. It is, and
worry.
it has been. Yeah. For generations, the private colleges over here, they've lived under this what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas protective legal shroud when it comes to handling violations. Now, whether it was drugs, weapons, assaults, the policy was whatever happened on campus stayed on campus. The local law enforcement need not be involved because the universities have their own student conduct rules, tribunals, and those are the people that dole out the punishment, or they don't dole out the punishment. Now, we have this gender equity law in the United States known as Title IX. When that went into effect, any school, whether it was private or public, that received any federal funding, including the private universities, they were now accountable for preventing and eliminating sexual assaults, not just issuing the sanctions. Now, as a result, the Education Department's Office of Civil Rights is now investigating 85 major U.S. universities in the United States for sexual assault violations just in this past year.
Wow.
These violations range from anything from doing little or doing nothing against the perpetrator of the alleged assault to actually punishing the accuser, even though the assailant was found guilty by the school.
This is outrageous.
It is. Now, recently, go ahead.
How come, I just can't believe that they would get away with this anyway. I mean, the authorities, the universities themselves. If someone has broken the law and they're aware that they have broken the law, irrespective of how they're being funded, they are in the United States, surely they have a duty to report this to the law enforcement agencies. Surely.
No, they don't, because the law does not apply on a campus. When a student goes to a campus, they sign away their rights. A campus is almost like a sovereign nation.
How can that be?
The local authorities are not called in. You'd have to have a very serious, a death, something like that. But if it's a sexual assault or physical assault, and it happens on campus, that campus has every right. They have their own law enforcement on campus with security, and they have their own rights. So you can do a search and seizure in a student's room without having to get a warrant, because the student, when they apply to that college, signs away their rights that they would have as a private citizen.
It is a crazy country you live in, Richard Kazimer, if you don't mind me saying so. That is just appalling. That's
well, not everybody's in agreement too, because as I was saying, that in California they signed a law recently called "Yes Means Yes." It's a ruling that clearly identifies the meaning of consent for any sexual contact. Now, the point of doing that was that a person has to say, "Yes, you can touch me. Yes, we can have sex." If you don't hear that yes, you do not proceed to the next base. Now, the point was to eliminate that he said, she said rape defense when the two parties who had been drinking, sex occurred without consent. That one person could say, well, she said, yeah, I thought she said okay. Of course, they were passed out when we did it, but
exactly. She actually said,
yeah,
sounded like yes to me. Yeah.
So what's happened is that even here, Harvard Law School, a bunch of law professors have come out against that school's new sexual harassment policy. They're saying that the rules are overwhelmingly stacked against the accused, and that it's one-sided. One Harvard law professor is concerned that the policy gives the alleged victims many more rights and protections than the accused. So we're going back to square one on this. But again, this is the difference between real life of living off campus and living on campus. Campuses here in the United States, particularly in private universities, are sovereign nations, and they don't have to apply by the local laws.
And of course, you get a whole load of young people away from home for the first time. All sorts of stuff goes on. And I guess, this is a tricky area, isn't it? Because, there's going to be a lot of sexual experimentation going on with young kids out from under the home roof for the first time. And things are going to, there's going to be murky areas. I'm not defending it in any way. I'm just talking practically. That will happen, where there's some people who feel as though they've been violated. They didn't give that yes, and as you say, you throw drink involved in it as well. So it becomes murky. But that's a question for the police to sort out. If somebody's complaining, not the university, that is just outrageous. I can't believe
the universities do not want the police on campus until something huge happens. They would rather just take care of it on their own so they can continue getting their funding, and then they don't, nothing shows up in a public record anywhere.
Now, George W. might have been, this can't be right. George W. might have been right about Saddam Hussein harboring chemical weapons. Surely not. What's going on here?
He was right about that, but let's draw the line of distinction there. He was not right about weapons of mass destruction. Further proof that Bush's invasion of Iraq was under the false pretense that Saddam Hussein was hiding those weapons of mass destruction, that Bush and his cronies had said that Hussein was going to use directly in attacking the United States. There's been a very disturbing article by New York Times reporter C.J. Chivers that was released this week. Contrary to the Bush administration's warmongers, a lot of them out still today, they're saying that the U.S. was justified in invading Iraq. The article is showing that a number of U.S. soldiers were seriously and permanently injured from exposure to buried and stored chemical weapons that Hussein had been using against his own people for years. Now, we all knew that. Now, mind you, this was before the invasion, too, that these soldiers had been exposed to these toxins. Again, these are not, I got to reiterate, they're not the WMDs that Vice President Cheney and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld had been assuring the world and the UN that Hussein had.
Right.
But these are the ordinances that chemical ordinances, mustard gas, nerve gas, things like that, those agents that Hussein had buried a long time ago. Now, what is important about this article and why it's coming out now is that it's kind of shades of Agent Orange, the defoliant that was used in the Vietnam War. The Pentagon has kept all of this under wraps. All of these soldiers that have found these ordinances that were leaking, they had no idea what it was. They just saw this stuff that was oozing out. They were exposed to these chemicals, and they didn't receive adequate treatment from the Veterans Administration healthcare officials because the Pentagon claims that this had never happened. They had put all of this under wraps for years, and now a lot of these vets have serious neurological disorders. And this is coming to light because the New York Times found this information out from the Freedom of Information Act. Also, why this is relevant is that those same chemical weapons are now in the same ditches and storage areas in areas that ISIS now occupies. So a dirty bomb does not have to mean nuclear. ISIS can use these chemical weapons in any way that they need to do to kill the people that are in Iraq, or, heaven forbid, smuggle them into another country and contaminate water and things like that.
So I wonder where Saddam Hussein was getting all those chemical weapons from. I wonder what has been their source country. It's good.
Probably us, Russia, anybody. You can buy those on the open market. Those are old means of the chemical weapons have been around since World War I. It's the same toxin, the same agents. You really don't have to do anything.
Easy to get hold of. So eBay,
yes,
probably.
Easily,
Probably just look for it on eBay. That's probably the answer to my question. Finally, Ebola. Now, we're a long way from it here in Australia, so we're not panicking so much. But, of course, you've had a few cases in the United States now, and the media is getting into a tiz over it all over there, aren't they?
Yeah, well, certainly not to make light of this Ebola epidemic in West Africa. But let's put this in perspective, Phil. I've been married more times than the number of people who have died from Ebola in the United States, and with far less justifiable panic, I might add. Now, while Republican Governor Rick Perry turns his state of Texas into this end-of-days mecca for the Christian right, who are now rejoicing that the plague, their baby Jesus, has finally brought down as punishment for same-sex marriage and gluten-free snacks. The U.S. media is really taken to this thing like the next zombie apocalypse. The Republican politicians are calling for a total ban of flights from Liberia to the United States, of which there are none. There are no direct flights from Liberia to the United States. And yet a couple of Republican politicians, they went on Capitol Hill and wanted to issue a bill that we ban
something that doesn't exist. Right.
Now, Fox News is on an hourly basis is having every non-medical wingnut on to gin up their widespread panic. And anybody who comes on with any credibility, they dismiss them as conspiratorial. It's like, no, you can't be telling us the truth. Well, here's a couple of things that are going on.
Conspiracy on what basis? What are they thinking the conspiracy is? That this is a conspiracy to try and wipe out the Western world with Ebola?
Let me tell you, this Ebola is now the new Red Scare of the 50s. It's like bold-faced lies meet science fiction through the Ku Klux Klan. Here's a couple of things. ISIS, I'm not kidding.
Is ISIS behind it? But ISIS has started Ebola, have they?
Here's one of the rumors. ISIS is purposely contracting Ebola and walking across the Mexican border into the United States to infect everybody over here.
How are they getting to Mexico? How are they getting to Mexico?
I guess from those flights from Liberia.
They probably think Liberia is just to the south of Mexico.
There's another one.
Just south of Mexico is Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here's another one. Obama is purposely doing nothing to stop Ebola because he, of course, is an African. He's from Africa, and he empathizes with those people. But he's also doing it because he wants to kill off white people. Like nobody except white people
are dying from Ebola. That's right. All those people in Africa so far have all been white. Hello.
Yes. And then there's always the classic for-profit theory that these Centers for Disease Control are planting the virus to make a ton of money off the vaccine that they're in cahoots with the big pharma industry. Now, getting back to the media, in a rare display of rational thinking, Fox News presenter Shepard Smith the other day, he went on the air and he chastised the media for their feigned hysteria, and he called for an end to the ratings-grabbing panic. Now, not one to never eat his own, right-wing bloviator Rush Limbaugh accused the gorgeously good-looking Shepard Smith of crying so hard on the air that his mascara was running. You cannot fix stupid. You cannot make this stuff up. It is so funny.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh. God bless him. I just love the way he talks so slowly, as though he hasn't really got anything to say. And so he says it slowly, so it lasts for hours. I don't know how anyone can find him entertaining. He's just, irrespective of what he's talking about, he's just as boring as batshit, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. And you know what's funny? If you can stomach listening to him for any length of time, he has dentures. And so you'll hear this constant denture clicking when he talks.
I'll listen out for that. All right. Yeah, no, look, we haven't had the Ebola panic here yet. Although
you will.
We will. I'll let you know. The latest thing is, well, what happens if it gets into Asia? And that's a genuine question, actually. If I guess if it gets into a country like the United States, then it can get acted on fairly quickly. What happens if it starts emerging in other densely populated regions where we haven't got quite the same health controls? Then you could see it leap from one region to another. Then we have something to worry about anyway for people in West Africa. But if it spreads continents, we've got a problem. And then, so the answer is we've just got to send more aid. We've got to treat this as a regional emergency, and everyone's got to help out. And I think in Australia, our Prime Minister is giving a few million to it. I think it's not. We need to give hundreds of millions of dollars and some medical forces to help keep this thing under control. Otherwise, there is a danger that it will spread, and then we're all going to look pretty stupid.
Well, the president is sending. I think he's asking for about 3,000 National Guard troops to go to Africa to help with the process over there of distributing healthcare workers and medical supplies, not to have any direct contact with any of the Ebola victims or patients, although I don't know how that's going to be prevented. Yeah. But the right wing, again, is going ballistic over here, saying that Obama is doing this on purpose to infect the National Guard members so that when they come back here, that they will purposely infect the United States.
Yeah, just the white people, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, because they're the only ones who suffer from Ebola, apparently. All right. Yep. Crazy as usual. Richard Kazimer, good to talk. We'll see you again next week.
All right, brother. Take care. Wash your hands.